Hey everyone, welcome back to another Entrepreneur Hustle video. And in this video, I want to talk about some of my key takeaways from Gary Vee, also known as Gary Vaynerchuk. Now, Gary Vee, he's a figure that I've been listening to and following a lot lately. He's one of my favorite entrepreneurs. And because I listen to Gary Vee so much, I wanted to recap some of the key things that I've taken away from his speeches and podcasts and just his general content that he's putting out. I wanted to be able to recap some of those things. And of course, I know that we have a lot in common in at least one key area. We both really enjoy rooting for terrible football teams. I have been a lifelong Detroit Lions fan, never been to the Super Bowl, never won a Super Bowl. Last playoff win, I think when I was, 2 years old, and I'm 31, and it's been bad. But that being said, he's a big fan of the Jets, and they are pretty horrible too, right? So we've got that going for us. But that being said, let's get into it. Let's get into what are some of the key things with Gary Vee. If you don't know who Gary Vee is or Gary Vaynerchuk is, do yourself a favor, Google him, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, find some social media platform and you're going to find his presence. And I guarantee you that if you actually have any sense of wanting to be an entrepreneur, I feel like he's going to be able to help you in some capacity. He's a really interesting figure, and he's really added a lot of value to my life and inspired me in a lot of ways. So again, I wanted to be able to have this video kind of recapping what some of those things are. So number one, one of the biggest things that Gary Vee, or the impact that I had, was his relationship with grades when he was younger. And, I know that you'll hear a lot of people talking about that, they were not really a good students, and in spite of that, they were still able to be successful, because I know a lot of times, like growing up, or at least for me, you're kind of, pounded into your head that you need to be a good student, A's, B's, in order to actually have this rich and productive life. But what was really interesting to me was like his understanding from an early age that if he failed in school, or if he got D's and F's, or just, generally underperformed academically, he had enough self-awareness to say, you know what, like that's not what I want to excel at. I enjoy my, even as a kid, he was talking about a lot of the business pursuits that he had, from selling baseball cards or lemonade or door-to-door, ripping up flowers, in somebody's yard and selling them back to them, right? So he kind of talks about his passion and self-awareness about being able to enjoy business. And, he seemed to be able to actually really make that connection that even though, school wasn't something that was going well for him, and that there was certainly a certain amount of judgment from some people in his life because of that, he was not able to doubt what he wanted to achieve or his own self-worth. And I contrast that with, my own, experience where, going through school, I generally was a good student. I ended up graduating from Michigan State University, and I graduated with honors. And what's so funny to me is I can kind of compare my experience with graduating with honors to his experience getting D's and F's and just not caring, or at least not letting it impact his, value of his own self to the business world or in any other way. And I feel like a lot of the time, in my experience, if I was, getting a B, I felt dramatically, less fulfilled or happy than I was for getting an A, or I would feel like a failure for getting a B instead of getting an A, which is crazy to think about. That it's like, that's my experience, that getting a B feels like the end of the world. And then meanwhile, you have somebody like a Gary Vee who has been so transformational, to business and so influential to so many people. Now, fortunately, that's something that I've gotten a lot better with. I've learned to be able to have that, kind of self-awareness, and I've been able to clean up some of those things where, I don't think that's as big of a deal for me as what it was when I went to college. But still, being able to have that contrast between how I took, getting a B, or, versus how he took getting a D, and truly not caring. And if I got a B, I was wondering if that meant that I was not going to be good enough to get the job I wanted, have the life I wanted, or be able to add value to, a business. Number two, the second thing with Gary that I kind of really take away is, how much he repeats himself. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean the guy's been able to build a really big brand, and he's been able to build a big following. He's got a lot of people that, really are interested in what he's doing and want to be a part of his mission. But that being said, there are some just core messages where if he talks about, self-awareness, right? Being able to match your aspirations with your hustle, or, being able to, start flipping to be able to actually have that be your thing that, sustains you to be able to have the business that you might want to have. There are just a lot of points where they're not necessarily new things. He might find different ways to package them. He might package it differently on LinkedIn. He might package it differently on a podcast. He might package it differently, based on a conversation that he's having or a speech that he's giving. But for the most part, it's really the same message. One of the takeaways in that case, for me at least, is thinking that a lot of times I think if I say something once or twice in a piece of content, I feel like, okay, the message is out there. I've said it once or twice, I don't want to beat this dead horse. But, you really have to keep in mind that, when you're kind of communicating to an online community, or you're communicating with social media, that if you're saying these things, once or twice or 3 times, that a lot of times, you're not reaching the same audience again and again. And if you are reaching the same audience again and again, it's likely people who are specifically seeking you out. Maybe your mom's following you on Twitter and YouTube and all the social platforms. Maybe she's going to hear your message 9 times a day, but your average user that you're connecting with is not going to be seeing that 9 times a day. So I think that's something really to keep in mind, that you can keep hitting the same message and keep repackaging it in different ways and kind of being repetitive, but still unique, and still be able to create a lot of content. So I think that was a really interesting perspective to me. And another variation on this is really the idea that even if the same person, by the way, who maybe isn't your mom, if they happen to be listening to the same piece of content 9 times in a row, or let's say 9 different days in a row they hear your content, they might hear it differently on the 9th day than they did the first 8 days that they were listening to you. Maybe there was a certain speech that happened. Maybe there was a death in the family. Maybe there was something that changed within them, either emotionally or physically, or a set of circumstances for them or somebody else. Something could have changed where they're hearing that message differently, where all of a sudden that 9th time that they hear it is the time that it changes, which I feel like that's really powerful in and of itself. So again, keeping in mind, if you're repeating yourself, you're likely not hearing the same audience. But even if you are, you could actually be speaking to them, even if it's the same message. You can kind of be speaking to a different version of that person that might be ready or in a place to receive the message where they previously weren't potentially ready to do that. So I think that's good to keep in mind. Number 3, I want to just talk about, of all the things I've listened to Gary Vee talk about, and he's had a lot of good nuggets of information, but I feel like one of the biggest ones, and it feels, almost a little obvious after you hear it, but I really liked his take on being able to create contextual creative. So contextual creative meaning if you want to be able to have a LinkedIn post, the idea that you can actually within your own community, let's say you happen to live where, there's a big corporation, or, in a certain address, if there's a big school, if you live in a college town, the idea that you can basically narrow down your advertising to where that school is or where that business is. The fact that you could literally say, hey, are you graduating from Michigan State, in a couple months? And right off the bat, if you actually time that advertisement with literally being able to narrow down, it's East Lansing, it's where the school is located, you know what I mean? So then you're actually calling them out from a time of when they're graduating, you're calling them out for the actual specific school, and then all of a sudden there might be somebody listening to the ad that thinks, I do happen to go to Michigan State. Yes, I am happening to be graduating, this fall or spring or whatever the case might be. And all of a sudden it's by actually making that contextual, that you might get more engagement out of that, which I think is really cool, right? So in other words, and by the way, of course, the idea is that you can't do that with just a TV ad, or at least not as effectively or cost effectively as you could with online marketing. Whereas you could literally take the same piece of content or maybe the same core piece of content, whether it could be a resume writing business or some kind of tutoring business or just some product or service that you're selling, you could have your core message, but have a different lead-in to say, hey, are you graduating from Michigan State in the next couple months? Hey, are you graduating from the University of Miami in the next couple months? Hey, what's up, Los Angeles? Like, hey, are you new to the job market and, you're looking to get your resume out there? I mean, the fact that you can actually have each of those creatives kind of flow in differently based on your community, target, drill into that. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, and it's something that I plan to be incorporating into my own advertising going forward. Number 4 is his kind of idea, and really wanting to be able to give without expectation. And I think that's really big. I think giving without expectation is a great way to not have resentment, right? So in other words, like if you go and you decide, like if you're in his case, he's a very influential figure. If he goes on somebody's podcast, or if he goes on there, to give an interview, he's not doing that saying, like I need you to down the road give this back to me. I mean, I guess there could be like certain contracts, things like that, but the point is that if he does it just for free, he doesn't expect that to come back to him in any way. But, that being said, the really interesting thing about how that starts to work is that if you actually start to give things without expectation, a lot of times people do feel obligated to be able to return that. So that could be you giving things, to 10 different people without expectation of getting something in return. Maybe 1 or 2 of those people actually, feel the need to connect you with a business partner or a supplier or help give you an idea that you wouldn't have thought about for your business. So, I mean, even if you just get a few people who are willing to give some of that back, that can become extremely impactful. And I feel like it's just, it can be really an easier way to go through life to say that, hey, I'm not literally doing this quid pro quo. I'm not saying that like, if then, you will do this kind of a thing. Just to be able to add value with the understanding that, first of all, worst case, you're adding value. Best case, there's going to be people that actually do want to give that back without you having to, remind them or hold it over their head or, again, just expect that to be coming back in any way. So I think that's a really interesting perspective, and it's something that I strive to do. And it's by no means something that I'm perfect at enforcing, but it is something, an ideal that I am trying to hold myself to. Number 5 is giving away all of your best material for free. And I think this kind of ties back to being able to give without expectation in a lot of ways, but I know that for a lot of people it can be really tempting to want to monetize quickly. So if you get a big following on YouTube, the question might be, okay, what course can I sell them, to be able to make as much money off of this as I can right now? Or can I sell them a premium subscription? Or, just things along those lines. Whereas I think if you actually focus long-term on being able to build your brand, if you actually focus long-term on being able to just give that content away for free, that you're going to be able to get a lot more almost in the long run for doing that. But once again, kind of tying that back to number 4, giving without expectation, even if that doesn't happen, I feel like there's a lot of pride to be able to say, like you are like doing the best you can to be able to add value to people's lives. You're giving that best content. And again, knowing that in the long run, statistically speaking, that's likely going to work out really well for you. So I feel like that's a really interesting thing. And again, it's something that I'm aware of right now. I've got, different, channels I'm doing. So I've got this channel, I've got Excel Better, and in Excel Better, I want to be able to give, all the best tips and tricks that I've learned, from using Microsoft Excel in corporate offices over the last 8 years of my career. I want to be able to give all of that away for free. And that being said, if there are people who actually say, this was great information, great videos, but I want to be able to hire you to, go over this problem one-on-one, or, hey, this was really great stuff, but I don't have time to complete this project, but you're obviously an expert. I want to hire you to just complete this project. I feel like that's great, but that's a part of being able to build that brand and just be able to just completely flood the market with as much value as you possibly can bring to the table, with the understanding that a lot of that's going to come back to you, right? Just don't expect it, of course. Number 6 is the idea of just loving the process. Like, I know it can be really tempting to just, decide that you want a certain goal and that you're going to suffer and struggle and be miserable until you get that goal. But it's really interesting because it's possible to do that, and it's possible to achieve that goal and still be completely miserable. And I think it's also really important to understand why you even want to achieve that particular goal, right? I mean, like, do you want to just, get a mansion or live in a certain zip code just to impress other people, right? I mean, like, is that really what's driving you to do what interests you? What if you decided to write a blog and travel the world, and that means that you never make more than $50,000 a year, but you get to do it on your terms, right? Let's say that every single day you love that process. It's something you don't want to retire from. You wake up and you love your life, right? I mean, the question is, like, is that worse than saying that you want to go into investment banking for 10 years, even though you absolutely hate it, because you know that it's going to make you a millionaire at the end of 10 years? And so I think that's just a really interesting perspective, that you should really find something where you love the process. And of course, you hear it a lot, and I think it is true that when you actually do find that thing that you love the process so much, if you find something that you're willing to work on, for free and put in just hours and hours and be able to beat on your craft and be able to just get better, I feel like those are the things that a lot of times in the long run that you're actually going to be able to make the most money from anyway. And, like Gary Vee had a great point about this too, saying that, a lot of times if you're actually true to yourself, there can be something that maybe isn't big now that maybe becomes big down the road. So like esports would be a good example of this. So you could think about some people that were gaming that might have said at one point in time where they could say, okay, if I'm involved in gaming now, this isn't really practical. I don't really want to have a future in this. And so maybe all of a sudden they really had that passion, but again, they decided to go be an investment banker where they're not as passionate. So maybe they're a middle of the road investment banker because they're chasing wealth. Meanwhile, they watch esports explode where they think, if I actually would have been able to just hone that craft or hone that skill or pursue what the heck I loved, if I was doing that, I might be 10 times more successful, or actually 10 times more successful in terms of wealth if I would have went that path, but instead I'm stuck doing this thing that I don't love as much, and I'm ultimately making less money now. So I feel like that's a really interesting point as well, that sometimes, like, if you stick with it, you can actually, be a part of that growth instead of actually just waiting for something to take off and then jumping on the bandwagon at that point. Number 7, is really the emphasis, and this is a message that gets repeated a lot from Gary Vee, but it's the idea of self-awareness. And I feel like this, it's so important to me, like the way I took this message. And it's important because I know that, building a business after work isn't for everybody. Wanting to be able to quit a job and be an entrepreneur isn't for everybody. And, for me, I feel like I had a tendency once upon a time to want to, not completely force my worldview on others, but I feel like I'd want to say, hey, if, becoming an entrepreneur was a better way to build wealth, I wanted to share that message and kind of fit everybody through that path and say, clearly this is the right way to do things. Like, you guys, like, you need to be able to work on a business. You need to be able to do this because you're going to be able to build more wealth in the future. But then not understanding, of course, that, like, not everybody wants to build wealth. So I think that that's where that self-awareness comes in, and it's something that he talks about all the time, and it's something that, again, has really, spoken to me. It's just that idea that as long as you're doing what you're doing because you want to be doing it, right? I mean, I feel like that's really the end of the game. If you're somebody that wants to work 16-hour days because you feel like, working on your business doesn't actually feel like work and you enjoy it, and you get as much satisfaction from that as you do from people who are going out clubbing and partying and doing whatever other things people are doing to enjoy themselves, then great, do that. And I think really at the end of the day, it comes down to being able to, again, match your ambition to your work ethic. That if you do, actually say that you truly deeply at your core want to be a billionaire someday, I think there has to be that, alignment that you're willing to actually put in a certain amount of work to get there. Number 8, I didn't do these in any particular order. I feel like I should have said that earlier, but if you stuck with me this long, I'm telling you now. But number 8 is talking about the fact that most people won't actually take action. And, for me, like, that's such an interesting point. And it's something that Gary Vee really harps on, just talking about, do something, try something, put a video out there. You know what I mean? Maybe the lighting sucks. Maybe the camera placement's terrible. Maybe, like, whatever the case might be, try it, experiment, put it out there, try to do something. And really the understanding that a lot of people just won't do that. I think that, understanding that message helped me take the plunge to finally start this channel. And messages like that helped me kind of take the plunge to finally buy domains or build websites or try to start a business or a series of businesses, because, I don't want to be a part of that community or a part of that group that is just not doing it or thinking about it without ever actually, doing it. The person who's standing around the pool really thinking that they wanted to swim, but they're too afraid to jump in. Like, I don't want to be that person, right? I would rather jump in and actually figure out, am I going to swim? Is this going to work? Is there a lifeguard on duty? I hope so. I feel like I would much rather have that approach to it. And, so it's just something that, has really spoken to me. And I know that Gary Vee is really big on just being able to say, hey, just create content, go out there, be willing to put yourself out there. And, I feel like that has been huge. And it's a big reason why I have this YouTube channel. So that being said, thank you guys so much for, watching all the way through. If you're interested in watching any future videos about entrepreneurship, about my own journey to be a successful online entrepreneur or just an entrepreneur in general, I'd love if you went ahead and hit the subscribe button. So thanks again for watching.